Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our new roundtable on information front lines of Russian-Ukrainian war. I'm very happy to see you all here, and I'm very happy to have our guests here and welcome our guests here, our keynote speakers, who I will talk about in a second, and I will introduce them properly. But before we dive into our discussion today, I would like to give a floor to Jan Grzymski from IC First, because he's one of the co-organizers of this roundtable, and I know he has some news to share. So that's what we will hear first. Jan?
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see all of you, and we're happy that that this roundtable series is continuing. So thank you very much to everyone involved, and especially to Olha, and also for today's roundtable, to Ostap, for all your efforts to organize this, and to the partner organizations, so New Europeans, Media Dialogue, Kozminski University, and IC. So we're very happy that all this continues, and because we have the historical momentum. I mean, and very soon it's likely that the European Union will start the negotiation with Ukraine, membership negotiation with Ukraine. So we will have on the same week we will have in-person last roundtable before the summer in Brussels in the Press Club, where we can also start our campaign, which originated in one of our previous roundtables on the Ukrainian economy, made in Ukraine. So to start the social media campaign, in which the sign of the solidarity, and could be, so the solidarity with Ukraine can be turned into more tangible form of solidarity by supporting Ukrainian companies, services, by buying Ukrainian services, products, and supporting Ukrainian companies. So this is very exciting, and we obviously will be spreading the news, sending you invitation, and it will be also a great opportunity to sum up all the roundtables which we had before, and all the policy briefs which were edited by Olha based on the roundtables which we have. Will very proudly show this to the public in that meeting, and then we can sum up, and we can also think of further steps which hopefully will involve after summer, or on the second part of the year, even more exciting activities. And as we envision to engage some young leaders, to do some workshops, trainings in advocacy of Ukrainian issues, which is so much very needed now, considering how the war unfolds and how the relation between Ukraine and European Union takes place. So this is very exciting news, and we're very happy that this continues, the project continues, and we look ahead for the future.
Thank you very much, Jan, for the update. And now the floor goes to Roger. So Roger from New Europeans, one of our co-organizers and also an inspiration to these meetings. So Roger, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Olha. I'll be very short. Thank you again for organizing this series of events, and for today, and for your welcome. Thank you to Jan for his contribution and what he's just told us about the 22nd of June. Thank you to our speakers. I'm so looking forward to hearing Nataliia, Artem, and Olena. I don't know, I think Olena is in the time zone where it's very early. I'm not quite sure where Artem and Nataliia are, but I know that Artem's from Taras Shevchenko University in Kyiv, and we have a partnership agreement with that university still from before the invasion, and Wolfgang, I know, who'll be speaking to us in a moment, has good connections there. And so we feel the connection really very strongly. I think that's all I want to say, and we feel it from before the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We were there before. We are with you now, and we will be with you in the future. And so we're looking forward to deepening this conversation, our conversation today. One of our directors is Lena Kush, and she is I'm one of the directors of New Europeans International, that is, and she is based in Kyiv, and she is in fact the first secretary of the National Union of Journalists in Kyiv. We're grateful to Wolfgang for the introduction, because she's worked with Wolfgang for longer than she has with us. And on the 6th of June 1994, you can see in very small print at the bottom of that certificate, the National Union of Journalists in Ukraine became a member of the International Union of Journalists. And it's a very good example of how valuable these sorts of links in civil society are. And we're a civil society organisation, and we mustn't lose sight of that. Everyone's talking about obviously the military situation. We need to think a lot more about the economic situation. That's what our Made in Ukraine, that's what the Made in Ukraine campaign will be about. But I think let's not forget the links at civil society level. And we were very touched yesterday to receive a message from Lena saying, congratulations, well, congratulations to us, congratulations to you. And I opened the attachment, and this is what I saw, a certificate of their appreciation of us, which was very humbling, because I don't know what we've done to deserve this. Well, we have done things. And I think the most important thing that we've done, though, is to give Lena and her colleagues the feeling that they are not alone. It's very frustrating at the moment, isn't it, to know what you can actually do from here that is going to really be of any real practical value at all. But I think, you know, each little drop in the ocean is important at the moment. Each expression of solidarity, each practical act, each attempt to reach out really means a lot, or certainly this is Lena's message to us, means a lot to her and to her colleagues. And what we've tried to do to help has been really important to them. It makes them feel that we are with them, and it gives practical expression to that. And you can see that in this certificate of appreciation that they've sent us. So we're not showing you this to show off. It's in fact difficult to know what to do with it, because as I say, it's quite humbling to receive something like this. It's not the sort of thing you say, oh, look at us, we've received this. But I do appreciate it very much, and I appreciate the sentiment behind it. And I think it just makes the point about how important that solidarity is from the perspective of those people actually in Ukraine, and in Lena's case, absolutely at the front line of the information war that is part of this terrible conflict. So I wanted to share that with you. And Ola, if I may, just very briefly, just two things. Jan has mentioned the Made in Ukraine campaign. I live in Italy, and Made in Italy became very famous as a kind of brand, as we know. And I was reading up about this the other day, thinking about, you know, launching the Made in Ukraine campaign. And what it was about, why the Made in Italy brand was so successful, wasn't to do with the products, even though the products are very good, and we all love wine and Vespers and olive oil, etc. And we know that Italian products are good, and I'm sure Ukrainian products are very good. But the success of the marketing strategy of the brand Made in Italy wasn't about the products. It was about the lifestyle, the idea of Italy, Dolce Vita, etc., and people wanted to identify by buying Made in Italy products with the Italian lifestyle. Say, you know, I'm a Dolce Vita person, I'm an Italian, I like the Dolce Vita. This is what the Made in Italy brand made. So I think I just invite you to think about, what does Made in Ukraine mean? What is, if we're going to use that, what does it mean? Of course, it means we want people to buy Ukrainian products and services, but it's a statement of identifying with Ukraine at the moment. It's got to work at the emotional level. It's about solidarity. It's about our common values and dreams and aspirations. And so I think that's why we think this Made in Ukraine campaign can have impact, because it can reinforce that emotional message, that solidarity that you saw and I talked about in the context of the certificate of appreciation. And final point, when we have this roundtable at the Brussels Press Club, which is the headquarters of New Europeans, which also, if you're able to come in person, it'd be fantastic, and you will see that it's turned itself into the Kyiv Press Club. It's got and that's important because the Brussels Press Club, where we're headquarters, is very well networked around the world. And so there've been sort of articles in the New York Times about the Brussels Press Club calling itself the Kyiv Press Club. So it's not just a kind of, an empty gesture. It really is a visual representation of that solidarity that has cut through internationally. So that's something to put a smile on our faces. And we'll have the event there, and we'll be having it 2 days before the European Council meeting, where, as I mentioned, one of the things that we're talking about is the issue of Ukraine's membership. Now, I think it's very difficult to get policy papers taken any notice of in the European institutions. Not impossible. I mean, they are accessible, but we're all trying to do that. But on the flip side of that, it's very easy. If you have a strong visual message, it's not difficult to get that across. And so we will, on that day, as Jan said, it's the last in this current series of New Dawn meetings, of the first series, and there'll be another series. So we want to package up the wonderful presentations, including today's, and push those through to our contacts in the institutions, and we will do that. But I think our number one priority on that day will be to get this idea of made in Ukraine, to find a way to get this message out, branding a message out on the eve of the EU Council meeting. And who knows, if we have if we hold up a sign on Ron Schumann, which is only 100 meters outside the front door of the Brussels Press Club, and the right person is looking out of the window of the Berlin Mont at the right time, they may well see it. They may well go, that's a good idea. And that could we'll try. This is, in a war, you have to fight with everything you've got. We have to go with what we've got. What we haven't got, we haven't got. What we have got, we mobilize. And we've got passion, we've got ideas, we've got this feeling of solidarity. And but we also have through these meetings, the opportunity to reflect with the help of the experts who are speaking to us today, on what we're seeing, on what we're experiencing, and what can happen next, so that we can turn those strong feelings of solidarity that we have into practical campaigns, practical calls to action, things that I would say an organisation like New Europeans has to have an answer to the question, what can I do? How can I do it? What can I do? Answers to that question. What do we need to be thinking about? What do we need to be focused on? To help us understand in the end what it is that we can do. So we're not just sitting here left alone with our feelings of solidarity, but that we can actually turn that into practical expressions of support. So thanks to our experts, thanks to you, and I look forward to the conversation and look forward to seeing you either in person or online on the 22nd of June, when we launch Made in Ukraine and when we sum up this current series of New Dawn and try to cut through to the institutions, and hope, even if they're not listening, that they'll be looking out the window at the right time and see our new hashtag. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger. Thank you for the inspiration also, and for your advice concerning this Made in Ukraine campaign, which is aimed at supporting Ukraine's economy and supporting Ukraine's business, so that Europeans, but also British people, people in America, in Canada, buy Ukrainian products and establish these connections with Ukrainian business, so that the economy of Ukraine is supported, naturally, not just by grants and money that is given to us by other countries, but also, through natural economic ties that the companies have. So thank you very much. And Bogdan Ressman would like to say a couple of words. He's from Media Dialogue, and this is another partner institution of ours. So Bogdan, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I can give you a little update of our activities. First of all, we are planning or let us say in this way, I am the media commission of the Social Democratic Party on national level. Make a reconstitution. I am a member of this commission again, and so we talked also about some events concerning Ukraine-Russian war. The first thing is that could be also interesting in Poland, that to make some connections between the region of Volyn in the west of Ukraine to Rhineland-Palatinate. There is still relationships existing between Rhineland-Palatinate and Opel in Poland. And I hope that there is a possibility to combine. I had the chairwoman of this commission as a Secretary of State of Rhineland-Palatinate, and so I hope it will work. We are working on this combination even before the war started. This is the first point. Second point is also to create a support program for journalists in exile, Ukrainian and Belarus journalists in exile, to help them to work and getting grounded for their work. And next point was concrete help with the visa problems for journalists in exile. I heard from a Belarus journalist there are several problems with visas in European Union member countries. So I got 5 names. Hopefully we can help in these cases too. And one information is also maybe interesting. I will take part on a round table of Belarus, also very narrow concerning to the Ukrainian war situation in Germany, where that's a closed shop with a little security circle with exiles from Belarus discussing the situation. The first time I will take part, and I will inform you. So the whole network seems to grow, and we have theoretical parts, we have practical parts, and we have the chance to inform the audience. And so thank you very much, Ola, that you again made it possible to meet here, and we will publish it. Jan, we talked about it, that we make this, the results of our events visible for the audience. And I think that's rather helpful, and I think solidarity with our Ukrainian journalist colleagues and with the Ukrainian people is the basic of the days now. And so I hope that we have a successful meeting today.
Thank you so much, Wolfgang. Thank you for your support. All right, so let's dive in. But before we start, I need to thank Ostap Kushnir for actually making this roundtable happen and for inviting all of the guests. So thank you so much, Ostap, for your support. And now we can finally dive into the discussion on information war lines, front lines of Russian-Ukrainian war. And we will start with the discussion made by Nataliia Steblyna, who is a professor at Vasyl Stus Donetsk National University, and also she's a media analyst at the Philip Orlik Institute for Democracy. So Nataliia, the floor is yours. Welcome to our roundtable, and let's dive in.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about Ukrainian regional mass media, because we have some problems in this field, and I'd like to share with you some results of research of my research and research of my team. So we work with regional newspapers and news sites, and I'd like to speak about the past of Ukrainian regional media at present, and also I have some thoughts about the future. What about the past? Ukrainian regional press inherited some Soviet traditions of the Soviet times, and some regional newspapers just changed their names and their owners, but the content remained mostly the same. In the Soviet times, we know that journalists couldn't be independent from the Communist Party, and now the question of editorial independence of Ukrainian regional journalism is a complicated one. And in Ukraine now we have an interesting situation. According to Ukrainian legislation, of course, mass media should be independent, and for instance, local authorities couldn't be the owners of newspapers or news sites. But of course, we have some problems with this legislation, and in the modern times of Ukrainian independence, a hybrid format just was invented. It called GINSA. As a rule, in the case of GINSA publications, regional editorial office just takes some money from a client and don't pay attention at the content. And here you can see some examples of GINSA publications in Ukrainian press, maybe some kind of text about sausage fabric, or a text about a flash mob from a local authority. And of course, these publications maybe look funny, but if we speak about, for instance, pro-Kremlin politicians, we also may have content with propaganda, pro-Russian, pro-Kremlin propaganda, and pro-Russian and pro-Kremlin messages. And for instance, several pro-Kremlin parties or politicians may sell their Russian Ruski Mir or Russian World with this format of GINSA. And I also know some cases when pro-Kremlin parties just bought some issues of local newspapers, and all the content was just about Ruski Mir or Ukraine being like Nazi Germany, or I don't know, some attacks on Russian speakers in Odessa, and so on and so forth. Thus, several media organizations in Ukraine just try to analyze the situation in the regional press, and I'm here representing Piliporlik Institute for Democracy. We just monitor situation in the regional media in 8 regions. Sometimes we change regions, but our last monitoring was held in these regions of Ukraine. So we work in the northern Ukraine, in the eastern Ukraine, in south and the west. In every region, we just work with 4 regional newspapers and 4 news sites, and our objectives is to analyze professional standards, GINSA, manipulations, propaganda, pro-Russian messages, and other issues. So I can share our results. Our monitoring was held in January 2020, and here you can see that the situation in regional media in those 8 regions wasn't perfect. We found several cases of manipulations, GINSA, or some press releases or unmarked advertisement publishing. And of course, several pro-Russian messages and fakes were detected. Here you can see also the examples of this situation, because that were average numbers. But of course, we have newspapers with larger numbers than average. For instance, a newspaper in Chernihiv region, it's in northern Ukraine. For instance, almost every page of that newspaper contained the publication about the paper's owner. Or, for instance, the newspaper from Kremenchina, it's a Luhansk region in the eastern Ukraine. On that page, a mayor of this city, he was mentioned 12 times. So the situation may be different and depend on the newspaper. On some news sites of Ukrainian regional mass media, you just can find such texts when you just may pay some, for instance, 6,000 hryvnias, and your text will be published in this paper without marking advertisement or someone else. And of course, Gensa is a format where propaganda or pro-Kremlin messages also may be published, and we also found that the examples, these examples are from Odessa, but of course we may find them in other regions as well. For instance, we detected cases of hate speech. For instance, some Ukrainian officials may be called Sprechenführers, for instance, or a newspaper from Odessa also published the text about some attacks on Russian speakers in Odessa, and so on and so forth. And before the war, we also found some cases of pro-Russian messages where some Kremlin officials were quoted without context and background. But if we speak about Ukrainian regional media on the beginning of the war, we also researched the situation in February and March. So we saw that all these cases of propaganda and Gensa, they weren't present anymore in the content of local press. Mostly local journalists just spread official information or supported Ukrainian armed forces and volunteers. And of course, we were surprised because we just didn't expect that there will be the day when we won't see Gensa or manipulations in Ukrainian media. But with the beginning of the war, it was just the case. So it seemed that the war just changed the situation in Ukrainian regional press, and Gensa isn't a problem anymore. We also saw the examples of heroism among regional journalists. For instance, here you can see publications from Facebook page of a newspaper from Ahtyrka. Ahtyrka is in the northern Ukraine, Sum region, and Ahtyrka was heavily shelled by Russian aviation, vacuum bombs, and other horrors. And 2/3 of this small town, just destroyed, but journalists kept working, and of course they hadn't an opportunity to publish a paper, but they used Facebook, and they stood in touch with their audience. And of course it's only one case, but we have the same cases in Chernihiv, in Zhytomyr region, in Sumy region. So of course we were just surprised with this situation. As a rule, regional newspapers refuted fakes, and only some news outlets spread the texts with fakes, and propaganda almost disappeared. And only one case we detected in Odessa, on the news site Timer. The owner of this site, he is a pro-Kremlin politician, and now in Russia. So it seems that situation was just perfect. But of course, if we speak about the future, now we also continue to analyze the situation, and now we can see that some problems are again can be seen in regional newspaper. In May-June, the number of manipulations, GenSA and other, is higher than on the beginning of the war. And of course, there are some cases when popular regional mass media are used for promotion, for attacks against political competitors, and so on and so forth. So now I see that Ukrainian media community must decide how to deal with GenSA and manipulations. We saw that GenSA as a format was used for pro-Kremlin politicians to create all this illusion about Ruski Mir, or Russian world. So propaganda, of course, was one of the leading instruments for this war. And weak Ukrainian regional media was used to spread it. And now we can see that, of course, pro-Kremlin journalists and media won't be able to function in Ukraine again. However, the problem of GenSA isn't solved. And some Ukrainian politicians and journalists are still using it. And after the first shocking months of the full-scale Russian invasion, Ukraine has returned to political fights, and mass media are still used for this aim. Therefore, it is important to solve this problem on several levels. Of course, we should use our legislation, but our media community as well should condemn GenSA. And of course, constant media analysis is important to show the general picture and to create a new system of independent regional journalism. Eventually, the new Ukrainian reality should break with its Soviet past, and it is important to deal with all its components and GenSA manipulations as well. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Nataliia, for this very interesting presentation and for all of the information that you shared with us. I already have a couple of questions, but I will wait until the Q&A session to ask them. And now we continue with the presentation of Artem Zakharchenko. Artem is a Ukrainian scholar and writer. He has a PhD in social communications. He's also a research director in the Center for the Content Analysis, and he's also an associate professor in the Institute of Journalism at Taras Shevchenko National University of Kiev. So thank you so much for being with us. Artem, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to describe our work. And yeah, I'll share a screen. Let's move. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Let's move from the regional level to the maybe most comprehensive level, to the level of narrative war, strategic narratives. And here I will show to you the data collected by our volunteering team, Communication Analysis Team Ukraine, or CAT-UA. It's a team who appeared since the first day of the our full-scale aggression of Russian Federation. So we are helping to our authorities, military and civil authorities, to analyze the information space, mobilization, and so on. And so we collected a lot of data. And this work is an attempt to make strategic analysis of this situation. Also, let me emphasize that I'm now showing only the data of February 24, April 03, because it is not safe to reveal more fresh data, more recent data, and so it will be a discussion about the data that it is safe to explore to a wide audience. Well, and let's start with the question: is it possible to conclude a peace agreement with Mordor? Could Gandalf conclude a peace agreement with Sauron. You know, this is Tolkien, and let's try to find the answer in our analysis. Our methods. Data set for the narrative analysis, as I said, was collected by KTUA volunteering project. Only communications in the Ukrainian information space was started. What does it mean? That means that pro-Ukrainian and pro-Russian people who are living in Ukraine or who are switched to another countries, but they still think them as Ukrainians, but not pro-Russian people or pro-Ukrainian people in Russia, in other countries were studied. Study period, yeah, as I noticed it from the beginning, and also we faced when we tried to study the strategic narratives, we are faced with the problem that there is now the metrics of analysis for strategic narratives, and there is also metrics for the national narrative analysis. So we had to develop our own metrics based on the Karina Korostelina works for the national narrative, and we received such result. So the general structure of the strategic narrative is let's clarify that strategic narrative is a story told by the state and its citizens who win the war, and it has such structure. The first one is disposition, how to distinguish between we as our side of the war, they, our enemies, allies, and other part of the world. So there are statements that make boundaries to separate these groups. The second one is normative order, reasons and aims for the war for each side and goals they are going to achieve. The third part, myths or stories about the war, how the war goes on. Yeah, real and fictional stories about the war and participation of each side in it, and about consequences, of course. And the fourth part of strategic narrative is calls for action. What are all the sides have to do under such circumstances? Now I will very briefly show you the structure of both Ukrainian and Russian in Ukraine strategic narratives, but also without myths, because it's a much bigger part, and 20 minutes will not be enough to show this. Well, so let's start with Ukrainian strategic narrative. Disposition. Ukrainians are shown as a total popular support for the army and secondarily to the political authority. So army is on the first place, political authority on the second. Despite the exhaustion from the war and unworthiness of some Ukrainians, of course, Russians are impersonated in the Putin as is, Putin alone. So they obsessed with the war, illiterate, who believe in the myths of the powerful army and propaganda. So people ruined, Ukrainian people ruined the myth about a powerful army, and also are starting to ruin a myth about powerful propaganda. A timeless treat for our people, and known statement of one of our politicians that our Russophobia is insufficient. Yeah, the disposition of allies is a narrative about strong support, but goes with the message of indecision of Western partners, disconnecting them from the reality, so they didn't do enough to stop Russia. And also other countries, each of them is contradictory in his own way. Let's move to the normative order. Ukrainians, what have to do Ukrainians regarding the Ukrainian strategic narrative? They have to protect Ukraine and the rest of the world against totalitarianism, but they also need support. Not have to do what are their reasons? I missed this. Yeah, reasons for the Russians. Putin, not Russians, but Putin aspired to rebuild the greatness of Russia, at least within the Soviet boundaries, or maybe to eliminate the Ukrainians because they do not agree with these plans. But he misjudged and now going to lose, or to destroy the world by nuclear weapon. The reasons for Western countries. They disregarded the emergence of Russian imperial revanchism and now have to support Ukraine and so prevent the Third World War. Yeah. And calls for action in Ukrainian strategic narrative are for Ukrainians to struggle and support the army by all available means, make no concessions, and cancel everything Russian, including Russian language, Russian culture. For Russians, wishing just death to Putin, and also often for all Russians, this wish gradually replaces all other wishes that were on the beginning. This wish appeared in really reached really big share after the Bucha situation, when a lot of people became known about the events when people killed civilians, Russian troops killed civilians, and this became named as a genocide. So a lot of calls are about the death, first of all, to Putin. For Western countries, call for action is call for military and other support for Ukraine and comprehension of the Russian threat. Yeah, so that is three parts of Ukrainian strategic narrative. What about pro-Russian narrative in Ukraine? It is spread most of all in the publics of occupied territories, namely Crimea and also Donetsk and Lugansk occupied regions. So people usually don't spread this narrative, but that is the narrative that Russians are trying to impact on Ukrainians. They create this narrative for Ukrainians and spread it in Ukrainian information space. So what do we have there? Disposition. Russians. Putin has powerful army and the popular support, and only a fifth column still can give up with the Western lifestyle. So they listen to Western politicians. They're afraid of sanctions, Western sanctions, and so on. Ukrainians. They have very inconsistent narrative, shows Ukrainians in active or passive military role. In one version, the Ukrainians just want to fight with Russia and made Western countries join them, but in other version, just Ukrainians are brothers, and only Western countries and NATO made them enemies with Russian, and so it's very inconsistent. Also, Western countries are weak. Even weak Ukraine can manipulate them. This is disposition. Normative order is that Russians have to prevent the Third World War and in the same time to destroy NATO. Also, they speak about the Nazification of Ukraine, and they mean the Ukrainization of Ukraine. And there are a lot of conspiracy theories with nuclear weapons about this. Ukrainians, in the same time, have aspirations of enemies and brothers, as we saw on the previous slide. And Western countries, a lot of also conspiracy versions, including the battle of two civilizations, like they told about Western capitalist totalitarian regimes and native Russian freedom so it's very funny explanation. And what about calls for actions? For Russians, disregard the sanctions and not to give an inch in the negotiations. So when negotiations started, there was a lot of critics toward the participants of the negotiations with Ukrainian part. They told that you should not give an inch and only demilitarization of Ukraine should be a good result. For Ukrainians, that is interesting that there are no calls except looking down. So maybe you know the phrase of Putin, нравится, не нравится, терпимая красавица, it's your duty, my beauty, yeah, how it was translated in English-speaking media. So they has no any reasons. They doesn't call Ukrainians to nothing, yeah, at all. And for Western countries, also look down, cancel the sanctions, the military support of Ukraine, and pay for the gas in rubles. So we can make some conclusions. Ukraine has its coherent strategic narrative, but Russia has not. It is not coherent, Russia's strategic narrative. As a result, Russia has no chance to use this narrative to persuade Ukrainians without pro-Russian attitude. Of course, Ukrainians with pro-Russian attitude listen to this narrative and can share the thoughts of it, but Ukrainians with another position will not listen to it because it is not coherent. Ukraine and Russia have different internal enemies. That is interesting. We had not stopped on this in detail, but Russia's internal enemy is the fifth column, people who listen to Western, but Ukrainian internal enemies are not pro-Russian people. Ukrainian internal enemies are people who are trying to make money on the war, corrupted people, people who do not want to help Ukrainian army, just fled from the war, and so on. A lot of categories, but they usually think that pro-Russian people in Ukraine had to understand that they were wrong, but people who make money on the war, they will not understand, I think, Ukrainians. Also, there are no clear calls in the Russian strategic narrative. After Bucha, Ukrainians also pushed back trade-offs. Brutal seriousness of the Russian narrative, it is from the myth part, they almost have no jokes. Ukrainians have a lot of jokes about war, about Russian army, about Putin at all, but Russian jokes are very few, and they are not funny at all. And the absence of heroes in the Russian strategic narrative. Ukrainians have a lot of heroes, starting with the Ghost of Kiev and grandma who destroyed the drone by the jar of pickles, and a lot of other real heroes, not only legendary heroes, but Russians have no, their only hero is Putin. Dehumanization of the enemy in both cases. So this leads to the narrative of Middle Earth war, or absolute good and absolute evil war. in Ukrainian case, and so-called missionary narrative in a Russian case. Yeah, it seems that every war has its form of narrative that may be classified as an ancient plot, for example, Troy War, for example, maybe Bible wars, and so on. So for Ukraine, it's Tolkien War between elves and orcs or something like that. But Russian narrative seems to be more closer to a Bible narrative. Yeah, that is the result of our research. If you have a question when it will be the Q&A part, I will be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Artem. I definitely have more questions for you as well. I have noted something in my notes, so I will be patiently waiting for the Q&A. But before we have it, we have a third speaker, the last but not least, Ms. Olena Goncharova-Lafoy, who's an editor and Canadian correspondent for the Kyiv Independent. And she has a significant experience in journalism in Ukraine, but also abroad. So, Olena, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the invitation and for having me here. And of course, one special hello goes to Artem. It's so nice to see you because for those who don't know, Artem was my university professor. So it feels especially great to be in such a wonderful company today. Just a few words probably before I delve into my speech, which I will try to keep short. I work for the Kyiv Independent right now, which is a new Ukrainian online media in English language, and we aim to tell the world everything about Ukraine. Well, before November 2021, most of my colleagues, myself included, we were part of the Kyiv Post, Ukraine's oldest English language newspaper, until we were all fired by our owner because he wished to install an editor behind our backs, and we were trying to defend our editorial independence. So yeah, we were in new media, starting at a very difficult time, and then finding ourselves covering war, which is of course a challenging task, but hopefully we are doing everything we can and serve Ukraine as much as we can. So what I wanted to talk about today, I won't be showing anything, just sharing a few thoughts. So basically, if we think about it, today is the 104th day of an 8-year war with Russia. And you know, when you say it out loud, it seems like nonsense, but Ukrainians all over the world will sure understand that immediately. But this is something surprisingly that is often missing in Western coverage of Russia's war against Ukraine. And that is the simple fact that the war did not start on February 24th, 2022. After Russia spent weeks amassing military forces along its border with Ukraine and neighboring Belarus, Vladimir Putin launched what Ukrainian officials describe as a full-scale invasion of the country. And of course, it marked the start of a very grim new chapter for Ukraine, as well as a major expansion of this 8-year war ranging in the country's east that had already claimed thousands of lives. And at the Kyiv Independent, we make a conscious effort to describe Russia's current aggression in Ukraine as a full-scale invasion or an all-out war. And that is something that I often have to watch for to make sure that we do have those words spelled out in our stories, in our news items, and everything we share in our social media, because it's our task to remind the readers that the war that gradually stopped making international headlines, unfortunately never ended, right? But rather became bloodier and more devastating for millions of Ukrainians across the country. In addition to this, as Russia started to deploy more troops and equipment to its border with Ukraine, I noticed how Western media would casually describe my country as the Ukraine. And yeah, to be clear, Ukraine was once referred to as the Ukraine. And to many, this era probably seems like little more than a slip of grammar, even though that this mistake had more than 30 years to be corrected. And just to be clear again, to Ukrainians, the Ukraine is a reminder of the 74 years during which it was a state controlled by the Soviet Union, and that spirit of which Russia now really tries to resurrect in the Ukrainian cities it occupies. So it is very hurtful for many of us to see that. And I was especially surprised to see the Ukraine in some Canadian media, which I follow rather closely because I'm based in Canada right now. And just in February, so when Russia was bringing all the troops to the border, I spotted it written in an article on the Canadian CTV News website, and also heard it on the National, which is the flagship news and current affairs program, of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, known as CBC. So myself, my colleagues, my family, and several friends filed reports to CTV News to correct our country's name, and thankfully the next day the article was corrected. But of course, I could do nothing about the second case because it was said on air, so the chance to to make a correction was gone. But the issue of whether to place there in front of Ukraine may indeed appear to be just, a little grammatical point, but it does carry a lot of meaning connected to Ukraine's long and painful history and its struggle for independence. So it is our role as journalists and editors to keep an eye on this issue and make sure that it is corrected in other publications and Western publications every time we see it being used. Now, secondly, here we come to a very sad day, to February 24th, which of course marks a day that a lot of Ukrainians want to erase from their memory. But it also marks the start, like the rise in attention paid to Ukraine as Western journalists began to report on the development situation day and night. And what followed was not always pleasant for us to see. For instance, there was a CBS correspondent calling Kiev a relatively civilized city. I myself spotted a number of CNN reporters mispronouncing names of Ukrainian politicians, different settlements, and that is something, of course, that can be fact-checked within seconds just by a simple Google search. And of course, we had this case of a Dutch journalist who posted a photo of a rocket impact on Odessa on Twitter, despite the fact that the Ukrainian government prohibited media to do so for safety and security reasons. And what we noticed, my colleagues and I, is the desire for this horrifically eye-catching headlines and tear-wrenching stories, as well as lack of deep, thorough analysis of the situation at hand, which often dominates Western media publications. Now, another point to mention is a rather sensitive one, but I think it's important to talk about it as well. And that is Western media's obsession with the Azov regiment, which has been marked by a complete lack of nuance in reporting. And like I said, it is a difficult topic that requires a lot of understanding and a lot of reading and learning, but to make sure that everybody is up to date, Azov was formed as a volunteer battalion in 2014 when the war started to fight Russian proxies in the east of Ukraine. And since then, it has been integrated in the Ukrainian army and, of course, became a symbol of Ukraine's fierce resistance in Mariupol's Azovstal plant. And one key factor missing in all the analysis of the Azov that I personally noticed is the difference between the Azov movement and the Azov regiment, and the inability to properly understand the overall phenomenon that has led to, of course, spread of damaging anti-Ukraine propaganda in the media. And just to give you a few examples, the headlines that I spotted, so those were articles titled "Ukraine's Neo-Nazi Problem" or "Who is Ukraine's Azov Battalion, the ultra-nationalist group," or this one, Ukraine's neo-Nazi Azov Battalion attempts rebranding. And that last one included the following lines. I'll read it just so you understand the depths of this article. As for Azov's history and ideology, it is clearly a fascist organization that traces its heritage back both to Nazism and far-right Ukrainian nationalist organizations, such as Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, known as OUN, and the Ukrainian Insurgency Army, known in Ukraine as UPA, which were responsible for the massacres of tens of thousands of Jews, Poles, as well as Ukrainians during World War II. So the authors of these articles often depict Azov as a paramilitary unit rather than an official regiment. And of course, that is an error because Azov is neither a paramilitary unit nor has any independence from the state, but it is an integral part of official structures, and they follow orders given by the Interior Ministry. Now, a very good source to go to when journalists or editors try to understand the Azov is Alexander Ritzman of the NGO called Counter-Extremism Project. And Ritzman once stressed to CNN that Ukraine is not a cesspit for Nazi sympathizers, which is a very, very good and important quote. And he recalled also that in the 2019 elections, the political win of Azov obtained only 2.15% of the votes. And that, of course, left its founder, Andrei Beletsky, out of parliament. And while it is likely that Azov regiment does have some ultra-nationalists and far-right extremists within its ranks, there is no data available proving this popular claim that all or even a majority of its soldiers are neo-Nazis. And of course, Ritzman also believes that journalists and analysts should report on the full picture of far-right extremism in the context of the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Russia, but also expose some of those extreme right networks and actors in Russia, which do exist in much larger numbers than in Ukraine. And because ignoring a dangerous organization like the Russian imperial movement or the Wagner private military company says, while focusing on confusing Azov, unfortunately plays perfectly well into Putin's war propaganda strategy, and yeah, it only serves to hurt the Ukrainian people they are trying to protect. Lastly, I just wanted to briefly touch on a recent trend in Western coverage. Ukraine recently entered its 100th day of the war, and when I say it, it seems a little bit surreal. But what we notice is that Ukraine doesn't have the same online attention it had going into those first 100 days, and that data was provided by NewsWeb to Axios. And so why is this important? So Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that global attention has been crucial for Ukraine and of course will be crucial, but he worries that people will get fed up and want something new. And so as war fatigue comes to probably all of us, so will the pressure on world leaders to help Ukraine and punish Russia. And of course, our duty as journalists is not to allow people to forget about this war, because there are figures to back this up. There has been a 22-fold decrease in social media interactions, that is in likes and comments and shares on the news articles published about Ukraine between the first week of the war and the most recent week. And it went down from 109 million to 4.8 million just this past couple of weeks. And what's interesting is that over a 6-week span in April and May, there was about 6 times more interest in stories about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard than about Ukraine. And we know it too well that the world can forget, as most of the media, Western media did, I'd say after 2015, and we just cannot allow that to happen these days. Thank you so much for your attention, and that will be it for me.
Thank you so much, Elena, for this interesting discussion. Now we can open the Q&A session, and I know Artem is having a meeting immediately after our roundtable, so I will ask my first question addressed to him first, and then we'll see if we have some time. So my first question to Artem actually is about the issue of dehumanization of Ukrainians in Russians' eyes, because I think to commit the atrocities like we have seen in northern Ukraine, like we've seen around Kiev and in Chernihiv and in Mariupol, Ukrainians probably were just dehumanized in the eyes of Russians, so that they could commit such atrocities and not think about Ukrainians as real people. And so I know that maybe you didn't look into the Russian narratives in Russia that much, but maybe you know something or you've read about that. So how did this dehumanization happen, and when did it start? Did it start 10 years ago, 20 years ago? It's especially concerning because in all of the interviews, ordinary Russians, they claim we are brotherly nations, which is a myth, obviously, but in their reality, we are. So how can you commit such atrocities to your brothers and sisters? So this is my question.
I don't think that the events in the northern Ukraine are connected to this dehumanization, because dehumanization is usually connected with so-called nationalists, national battalions, and so on, that they usually emphasize that only some nationalist structures, Nazis, have to be killed, have to be eliminated from Ukraine, but after they faced real Ukrainians in our country, they saw that they do not support their invasion, and they are steadily trying to understand that all Ukrainians are against Russian invasion, and they are starting to dehumanize all the Ukrainians. So it's a very recent process, I think, and also the war crimes in the Kiev region, in the Sumy region, Chernihiv region, it is just the consequence of another processes and of maybe mentality of Russians, of propaganda, but not. They will do the same, I think, with different people, not only with Ukrainians. If they invade Germany, Poland, United States, they will do the same, I think.
Okay, thank you. And I see Yaroslav raising hand. So, Yaroslav?
Yes, I have two questions actually, both to Artem and Olena. First to Artem, maybe shortly. You mentioned a lot about pro-Russian narrative, but I'm just curious, what's the channels of narrative? So what's the audience? How big is the audience? And what are the channels of this narrative nowadays in Ukraine? To what extent, how much it is still dangerous? And also one short comment to this, because you mentioned that this pro-Russian narrative is a little bit maybe not completely coherent, maybe not completely rational, and a bit pompatos, no jokes, etc. The problem is that, in my opinion, that even bad propaganda, even the propaganda which we perceive as not very good, maybe quite attractive to certain segment of the population, and that's the problem here. So that's one issue, and also one question to Olena, comment partly, because you mentioned a lot of issues about those issue about the Azov. And kind of the excuse for treating the Ukrainians as Nazis, and I agree that's important part of the story. But I'm also thinking that to some extent, very very dangerous part of it is related with the, let's say, left political side, left wing, and is related with the idea that we should respect Russia, that Russia has its zones of influence in Ukraine, and that actually is a lack of the agency for the Ukrainians, which is quite funny, because there's exactly the same group which is defending the Native Americans and so on. And then I think it's even more dangerous, in my opinion. So that's.
Thank you for the question. Let me share one more diagram. That is the share of pro-Russian attitude in the whole data set. So it's social media in Ukraine, and only 9% of posts was pro-Russian. So that means that it is not widespread in Ukraine when people speak about that, and in more detail, the authors of these posts are usually not common people. It's just usually propagandistic media and some known propagandists as bloggers. So the thoughts of ordinary people are very rare in our information space. Usually only propagandistic accounts share this source. And the second question, sorry.
It was a kind of a comment, rather, that if they met certain, even bad propaganda can be okay. Actually, you mentioned that probably in case of Ukraine is not working now, but it may work if they go to the certain population group of the segment of the population. I would say maybe after the war it's not working, but before maybe could work. So I'm talking about it also because of the fact that I'm afraid there's a certain type of the propaganda which already appeared in Poland, for example, and we just starting to raise this historical problems, the fact that the Ukrainian children get 500 plus, etc., etc. It's a process which is ongoing. Up to now, it's not very important in my opinion, but it's dangerous.
Yeah, sure. Now let me clarify. I think that people who faced a Russian invasion will not believe direct Russian strategic narrative because they saw how it was in the reality. But they also have another instruments, indirect instruments. They were successful before the war just to make enemies different parts of Ukrainian society. So they divide people on Poroshenko and Zelensky supporters, divide people on vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, and a lot of other traditional and modern outlooks and so on. So they may still make the same after the war, and they are trying to make the same just now. We see a lot of attempts just now to make another divisions between Ukrainian people, and that is, I think, the most dangerous. That was their mistake. They maybe thought they have wrong thoughts that here there are a lot of people who may believe in Russian narrative as is. Yeah. So if they tried to make more attempts to divide people, but not to promulgate the Russian strategic narrative, they would be, they were more successful, but they were not doing that for our success. Yeah. Yes.
And there was a question to Olena, I think, right? Or it was the comment, Yaroslav?
So give me that, but more like a comment, actually.
Yeah.
All right. So I have actually another question to Nataliia, and it's a question about the data that you have collected, because you were analyzing the regional media and you saw us a very nice diagram showing the percentage of Jinsa in different media, right? And my question is about the data that you collected. So how did you collect it, and what is the data that you are using in your research?
Thank you for your question. So we have 8 officers in Ukraine, and in this office there's a coordinator, and the coordinator collects newspapers and collects news items from news sites. And I said that I mentioned that we analyze content of 4 newspapers, regional, and 4 news sites. And afterwards, a team analyzes this content. There are 3 members of the team, and because there may be some I don't know, speculations about our objectivity, so we usually analyze content of other regions. So we have something like cross analysis. So for instance, if we have Jinsa materials, so we spread our spreadsheet with our colleagues, and 6 experts should agree that this particular item is manipulation or propaganda or something like that. For this analysis, we usually in the region we have as a rule 400 materials, news items in news sites, and about 200 and something materials in newspaper for a wave of our monitoring.
And you've been collecting it over time, right? So it's not just one wave, but you've been doing it for some time.
Yes, I presented here data from 2022, but my institute have been analyzing regional news content from 2012, and I think that, yes, for 10 years now.
Wow.
So we have this data published on our site, but unfortunately it is only in Ukrainian. So we have, so for everyone who understands speaks Ukrainian, I can share our links and share our data.
Yes, please, that would be great. So I'm lucky that I am Ukrainian. I understand the language, so perfect. That would be really great if you share the links. Excellent. I can see Ostap raising the hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. Before Artem goes, I mean, actually, I have questions for all three of our presenters. So, Artem, what will be the long-term impact of this strategic narrative, coherent strategic Ukrainian narrative, on the functioning of Ukrainian society? What will change after the war in the long run? Yes, maybe some perception of Ukraine's perception of foes and friends. What will be, how it will kind of propel the development of Ukrainian society. Then to Nataliia, how do you think will the profession of journalists in the regions become more prestigious after the war? Because in particular, the JISA issue, they are related to underfunding or, for instance, absence of market-orientedness of the experience, which would allow journalists to do some fundraising and become more independent. So will the war or the shock of the war encourage changes in the way regional journalism functions and attracts new people? And to Olena, I heard quite a lot or quite often that the majority of Western journalists, whenever they are reporting anything from the region, they are stationed in Warsaw, and indirectly they are kind of emitting this kind of, oh, not Warsaw, Moscow, sorry, Moscow. They are emitting this kind of Moscow-oriented messages. How do you think, how many of them will move to Kyiv or to other Central Eastern European cities after the war? Or will they continue staying in Moscow? Thank you.
So maybe Artem will take the question first, and then we will move on to Nataliia and Olena.
Yeah, thanks. It's of course complicated question, and it is not a direct answer on it, but we may think that the main direction is the relation between this strategic narrative and the change of our national narrative. I think that our Ukrainian nation after this war will be more connected to each other and connected by this strategic narrative, because it was very, very interesting situation when Karina Korostelina, I cited on the beginning, studied Ukrainian national narrative. He found out in 2013 that Ukrainians have 5 strategic national narratives instead of 1 in ordinary country. So Ukrainians thought about their country in 5 different ways. After a revolution of dignity and start of so-called small Russian invasion, I think there became 3 narratives, national narratives. But after this full-scale war, I think we will have more united nation. We will have more clear boundaries between we and they. So we will be able to act more we will be free to act and build our country, I think. That will be the main consequence.
Thank you, Artem. So maybe Nataliia can take her question now.
Yeah, thank you, Ostap, for your question. Yes, I hope that this profession of regional journalism will be, I don't know, more important for the society, because in Ukraine there is a problem of maybe understanding the essence of regional journalism. As a rule, people don't pay attention to regional newspapers, regional news sites, and some of them just don't know who is their representative, who is their representative in Verkhovna Rada, or so on and so forth. And of course, there is lack of control of local authorities and so on and so forth. So it is extremely important for Ukraine just to understand the meaning of the regional press, because we usually speak that journalism is important, but as a rule, we mean that all national journalism is important, and we don't speak about regional content. And I've heard somewhere that democracy starts on the regional level, because people should understand that local authorities, schools, hospitals in their regions, in their region, are important, and journalists should cover it. So I hope that this full-scale Russian invasion maybe will teach us to be more responsible as the citizens of certain Ukrainian regions. Because, for instance, people of some Ukrainian towns, they understood that their, for instance, local authorities weren't good enough during the war, because, of course, we have examples when majors or representatives of our civil administrations, regional civil administrations, are behaving like heroes, but of course we have cases of collaboration with enemy, and these majors and these local representatives were elected by Ukrainians, so they just didn't pay attention to local politics, and I hope that of course after our victory we will change that. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Nataliia. And now, Olena, your question.
Thank you, Ostap, for your question, which is a really excellent question. And I myself was often puzzled by the fact that so many Western media would have bureau in Moscow covering Ukraine events from there. Well, I think it was May 11th when the Washington Post announced that they are bringing 2 people as their Kiev bureau to cover Ukraine, and hopefully I think that was one of the first like major Western media to announce the new bureau. I might be mistaken, but I think they were. So let's hope that those would be that would be the start of this major trend when more Western media would actually come to Ukraine and cover Ukraine from within, because I truly believe that you cannot really understand 100% what you're talking about if you are not physically in the country, if you are not communicating on the ground in different areas, not just in Kiev and Lviv, but going to the regions. And we know really well from Natalia's presentation today that is really important as well. And just being in Ukraine might also help some of those Western media to avoid spreading a more Russian narrative and bias that was often penetrating the publications. So let's hope this trend continues.
Thank you so much, Olena. Do we have any other questions? So I actually have one, the last one, and it's a question to Olena, but also to Nataliia as well. So what I've noticed is that we actually, as Ukraine, we need to have some counter propaganda in other countries, because I have a lot of friends from Italy. I've been studying there, and I speak a little bit of Italian, so I can follow some news in Italian. And what I see there is that we don't really have a very strong voice there. I don't know if Roger agrees with me or not, because Roger lives in Italy, and maybe he's more knowledgeable on the topic. But what I've noticed in my bubble, in my Italian bubble, is that there are a lot of very contradictory voices about the support of Ukraine, about giving the arms to Ukraine, etc., etc. And I feel like we do need to have an outlet for counter propaganda, for this message, support Ukraine, and here's what the truth is, and whatever you hear is not really a truth. And so, what do you think about that? Ukraine having either the media outlets in other countries or some people being, counter propagandists, basically giving the messages to people in different languages, telling the truth, basically. So, Olena, Nataliia, if you maybe want to respond to that.
Okay. I'll start. I think that for Ukraine we don't need like something like propaganda. I think that we need qualitative journalism, not like Russian propaganda, Russia Today, and all this propaganda media, but we need qualitative journalism, and of course. For instance, the Kyiv Independent is an excellent example of this journalism, and just greetings from my students for the editorial office. We followed all this situation with Adnan Kivan and so on and so forth. I think that, of course, it is important to have such news outlets and maybe some journalists, but I have some hope here because Ukrainians are extremely creative, and they can unite with each other and to create some interesting projects. So maybe we don't need like only traditional media. I think that we need some projects, creative projects about Ukraine, about different issues, providing some context about the situation. Maybe that will be an interesting example.
Yeah, I totally agree with Nataliia, and I think that maybe it would be nice to have. Well, we do have Stop Fake and Vox Ukraine, and those are really excellent examples because they are picking those malicious propaganda messages and narratives and explain to readers in a lot of detail what went wrong there. And I think if we had something like this in different languages, perhaps in a few European languages such as Italian, German, maybe some others, that would be really helpful for us to spread actual information on what to be aware of, how to understand and maybe even track Russian propaganda, and also even local propaganda in those countries. But it is a huge undertaking, and I'm not quite sure how easily it can be done, but that's a good question to think about.
Thank you, Olena. And Roger has his hand raised. Oh, you are muted, Roger.
Thank you. I would just want to say thank you again for the presentations. And I'm going to say to Olena, another of our directors is Agnieszka Wajner, who you may know, who's based in Canada. Perhaps we could put you in touch actually after this call. I just wanted to come back on what you said about Italy, since I'm based in Italy. I think as much as happens in Italy, those of us who know Italy well will realise anything to do with Ukraine in Italy has much more to do with Italy than it does with Ukraine. That's the first point to make. I mean, Italy is a peace-loving country, so it wants an end to the conflict. that's perhaps understandable. But I think behind that there are more things that I do and I'm concerned about. I think the Cold War has still left its shadow on Italy very strongly, and so it's seen very much. There's still quite strong pro-Russian currents in Italy and quite strong anti-American ones, and they tend to see this as a kind of through the prism still of sort of Cold War thinking and the kind of NATO provocation of Russia that plays well. That needs to be countered. I think that's extreme. I find that extremely disappointing. And I think another aspect is the economic one, because Italy is very heavily dependent on its trade with Russia, much more so than it is with its economic ties to Ukraine. And so you get this sort of reaction against the sanctions against Russia, which again is extremely disappointing. And what I say to my friends in Italy is, look, I understand that this Italian economy is being hurt by the sanctions in Russia, but you can't possibly take a position where you say you don't support the sanctions on Russia. You have to say, of course, we stand with the international community in solidarity with Ukraine. But by the way, please take account of the fact that we're particularly badly affected, as they were particularly badly affected, for example, by COVID and so on, and ask for some assistance for Italy as a result of the fallout from the Russian sanctions, which hit Italy particularly hard. And so I think the answer to I'm not sure there's very much that, the problem with articles about Ukraine and Italy is they tend to be read by people who kind of know about this already. Whereas what you really need to challenge is the sort of Italians' view about themselves, not about Ukraine. That's where they get to the Italians. And so I think what's quite important is I think the way into this is to do it at a kind of European level and in terms of other networks, and to get what the Italians really don't like is this idea of brutta figura, of not looking, that my Italian friends would not like to hear what I'm saying at the moment. I do love them dearly, but I mean, not all my Italian friends, I promise you. Otherwise, I say friends in the Italian sense, amici, in that broader sense, slightly ironically, as I hope you picked up. I mean, they're not really my friends. They're people who I strongly disagree with. My friends probably think the same way as I do, but a lot of them do on this, certainly on this issue. I think the way into it is to try and get Italy pulled up on this by other EU member states and not allow them to get away with it, rather than trying to educate them about. We continue to try and educate people about Ukraine. I think we have to continue to do that hard work, and we would play our part in doing that. But I don't think that will cut it. I think Italy needs to be pulled up on some of this. And I think, we've been talking about fake news and false narratives and so on. Yeah, we need to keep an eye on those in the Italian media. And, there is the European Union Disinformation Center, and there are other avenues. And I think that, Ukraine has got enough to worry about without having to kind of take on the task of bringing Italy into the 21st century. But I think others should take their responsibilities seriously. And I think one of the things that you can do is to help Ukraine is to say to the European Commission, are you keeping an eye on what's happening? Are you monitoring what is being said about this issue in other EU member states? Don't feel that, we have to solve all we Ukrainians, I think of myself as a Ukrainian, that we have to solve all these problems ourselves. We need to ask others for help and come at it laterally.
That's so true. Thank you so much, Roger. I think we have taken quite some time. I think we are 10 minutes over time, but thank you so much for this interesting discussion. Sorry for taking a bit more of your time than expected. Thank you for being here. Thank you for raising all of these interesting issues. I will send you the link to this recording once it's posted online, and so we can spread it beyond our networks. So thank you very much for being here. It was a pleasure to talk to you all. And I hope to see you on the 22nd of June when we have our presentation in Brussels, and I hope we can continue our discussion.
Thank you very much.